Welcome, Sega fans, to the podcast that money can't buy because we haven't hit YouTube monetization goals yet. It's the Sega guys. We're back with more podcast action. I'm Dan, the Mega Driver, and with me, as always, he's the Okawa to my Iruichina. It's James the Segaholic. How you doing, mate?
I'm brilliant, mate. How's yourself?
Yes, very good, very good. It's been a while since we actually got one of these done, isn't it? I mean, we've used that buffer. That buffer has done what it needed to with all those episodes we've got in the bag, and we've left us in quite an interesting position because we're actually able to record and release content in quick succession, which means we're able to react to the gaming news out there.
It's not something that we regularly do, is react. And if we do react, it's like it comes out in 4 weeks' time and then it becomes old news. So I obviously, this is one that we've kind of shifted the Mega Drive at the Movies episode that we've got planned off the back of all this story that came out. Obviously, Tom Warren had put that tweet out, was it yesterday or the day before, that during, I think, the whole FTC kind of case, that information came out that one of the companies that that Microsoft, looked at seriously acquiring back in 2020 was Sega. And it's one of those things that every time on Twitter, it's a massive bugbear of mine, I'm not going to lie. Every time there's a story about Sega at all, you go in the comments and you're guaranteed to see loads of Xbox fans, maybe fanboys, that are, oh, we'll just buy Sega, we're just going to take Sega, or we'll get Sega. And I'm like, well, it's not quite that easy. And I think what we wanted to do was, rather than just going a pure rant about why it's not going to happen and all that kind of thing, right? I think the way to approach it is to look at the kind of historical origins of why that relationship still kind of exists, the window that maybe Microsoft missed when Sega were at the lowest, go into that in a bit more, and then obviously just talk through our reasoning rationally as to, the benefits for both companies, the disadvantages for Sega, why we think it would happen and why we think it wouldn't happen. So there's quite a lot to go through, but I think looking at the notes for the kind of the agenda for what we're going to go through on it, it's got the potential to be a pretty good show, mate. Yeah,
it's going to be a good conversation, mate, because this trial with the FTC has got a little bit spicy between the FTC and Sony and Microsoft, and as gamers, it's been a little bit more interesting than we would have thought. I mean, it's like we always think of back in the day, didn't people just play games, and you wouldn't have thought that a court case would have been this interesting. But this was an interesting nugget to come out of it, that Sega were one of 12 companies that were listed among those for acquisition by Microsoft. They are buying Activision Blizzard after all. They bought ZeniMax Media, who obviously have Starfield, Elder Scrolls, etc., for $7.5 billion. They've got the Activision Blizzard deal, which is $69 million. And as we go through the evidence, Sega was on there, one of 12 gaming companies. The other one being Bungie, who Microsoft owned, and then allowed them to go independent, and they partnered with Activision, then went fully independent again, then got bought by PlayStation. The mind boggles, mate. But so I think the notes was there in the email, and I'm just reading this from the article, was: we believe that Sega has a well-balanced portfolio of games across segments with global geographic appeal and will help us accelerate Xbox Game Pass both on and off the console, Phil Spencer wrote. The plan would have added Sonic the Hedgehog, Shin Megami Tensei, Yakuza, Football Manager, and other franchises to a Microsoft portfolio. And in his memo, Spencer and his team said the deal would bolster Xbox Game Pass and lead to more game sales and more platforms. So notably, the Sega games wouldn't have been exclusive to the Xbox plan, which I find is interesting. So that's kind of what was unearthed in the whole article. And as you say, mate, we'll go through the pros, the cons. Will it happen? Won't it happen? But I think you put it best. It's probably best to go all the way back to 22, 23 years ago, when this nearly happened before.
Excuse me. I mean, whenever we spoke to Peter Moore, obviously one of the things that he had mentioned was that, Robbie Back reached out kind of in the death throes of the Dreamcast and asked, what can we do to help? And as Peter also said, clearly they wanted to help, but they also wanted some IP. They wanted those games. So, back whenever, Sega knew the Dreamcast wasn't going to be viable going forward, Isao Okawa, then chairman of Sega and CSK, obviously the holding company that owned Sega at the time, he had already been lobbying, meeting Bill Gates allegedly in person to actually request that the Xbox be backwards compatible with Dreamcast titles, to kind of continue that legacy of not just the games, but adding that kind of online support as well that obviously Dreamcast started, and then obviously Xbox carried on with Xbox Live. But, sadly, Okawa-san passed away on the 16th of March, I believe it was, in 2001. Less than 2 months after the Dreamcast had been officially discontinued on that call on the 31st of January 2001. And then the final date was the 31st of March, and that's never all production ceased and Dreamcast ceased to be. But that kind of period, while Okawa-san was alive, Sega were still at its lowest. They were still hemorrhaging money. There was mass layoffs as the company restructured, as they moved to being more hardware agnostic. They also had a monumental financial outlay in terms of the Dreamcast inventory, not just in Japan, but worldwide. Consoles, peripherals, games, you name it. We've seen, the Dreamcast bundle with VF3, MSR, and Jet Set Radio going for 25 quid in Electronics Boutique back in the day. So the hit that they took financially to clear that inventory was also massive. And I think if Microsoft, obviously, I don't think wanted the hassle or had maybe the expertise at that point of running another video game studio sort of thing. I think they were still very much, although they had the experience of PC gaming with Windows, they were still finding their feet in this whole kind of console game. And I just think if that window they had there, whenever Okawa-san was still alive, the debts were kind of still mounting up, costs were ramped up, that they might have had an opportunity to get Sega at the lowest ebb. Now, there's still the kind of cultural and, the kind of legislative side to an American company buying a Japanese company. And it can happen, but it is very difficult. But that was the window. If ever Microsoft were going to own Sega, and I'll die on that hill and say that Microsoft will never own Sega, ever. That's just my opinion on it. But that was their window. I think when Okawa-san sadly passed away, obviously he forgave any debts. He'd given $40 million to Sega of his own money to fund the Dreamcast R&D. He funded Dreamcast. So that was a debt. Okawa-san forgave all that. And then obviously his shares in Sega, CSK, were gifted back to the company, which was some 600 odd million.
Yeah.
So he forgave all that debt. He gave money back to the company, and he put the company back on a stable financial footing. From that moment, that's what I think any chance that Microsoft had, or anybody had, obviously Sammy would, buy them eventually. But I think in terms of a massive kind of conglomerate company like a Microsoft buying them, that door was slammed shut when Okawa-san passed and forgave the debt.
Yeah, because Sega Sammy was more of a merger rather than a purchase, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But you've got to imagine, Sega's market cap at the moment is around $5 billion. Back then, you couldn't have imagined that it was more than $1 billion, really, because their debt to, they couldn't pay their debts effectively. They were looking at bankruptcy. As I don't think people really realize how dire the Dreamcast situation was, because they were hemorrhaging money, as you say, and just didn't have the ability to pay it back. And there's a book that I think that you showed me where they're talking about that Akawa and I think Ira Majiri was going back to Microsoft again and again, trying to get some sort of deal for the Xbox to play Dreamcast discs, to integrate the online, or maybe even to buy Sega. And Xbox back then weren't interested. I mean, they did get a bunch of exclusive deals out of Sega, and but I think it's as they say, they kind of they took what Sega did and learned from it and kind of walked away. But you'd have thought that there would have been, as you say, it would have been very difficult for an American company to buy a Japanese company. But you would have thought at that moment for a company like Microsoft, who's completely brand new to the console industry, who there was doubts in the senior leadership. If people watched the Xbox story, there was massive doubts in the Xbox senior leadership side around the viability of a console. Having someone with Sega's expertise, and I know they just had 2 consoles which were commercial failures, but they've lived and breathed that industry for over 20 years. You would have thought that there would have been benefits to having that expertise, having that portfolio, and having some recognizable IPs, and Microsoft passed on it.
That's it, mate. As you say, it's not just the games aspect. It's we've spoken on here before, the arcade heritage. Sega always been at the forefront. The Lockheed Martin stuff with Model 2. They were always looking to push that envelope.
Yeah.
So yeah, the systems may have been commercial failures. Obviously, Saturn and Dreamcast were referring to, but there was an awful lot of creativity. I think that, and I know obviously as we've spoken about, the Xbox did really well out of the deal. Obviously, Jet Set Radio Future, Crazy Taxi 3, Gun Valkyrie, Shenmue 2, Toe Jam and Arrow, House of the Dead 3. You can go on and on. There's loads of them, but the one game they didn't get was Virtua Fighter 4.
Yeah.
And I think I remember I asked Peter Moore that, did he know why Virtua Fighter 4 went to PlayStation? And he said he didn't really know the answer. He said you'd have to ask Yu Suzuki.
Yeah.
And I just think, looking as well, slight tangent here, but I think looking at the way that Yu Suzuki went to Sony for Shenmue 3, I don't know if maybe somehow that, again, did Yu Suzuki perhaps see his vision for his games more aligned with the Japanese company? Because it does seem kind of strange that VF4 went with Sony, Shenmue 3 decades later went with Sony again. So I don't know, just a slight, that kind of twig. Whenever I seen the documentary that's come out on the DVD, the history of Shenmue and stuff like that, and seen him standing there holding a copy of it and things, I just think, did he maybe align more with PlayStation after Sega kind of ceased to be as they were?
Certainly seems possible, but I think my theory is probably what we're seeing in the Afterburner Activision Blizzard case right now, is that Sony are very opportunistic and enjoy to foreclose on other games. It's no secret that Virtua Fighter 1 was the game that drove the design of the original PlayStation, and what better way Sony always want Ken Kutaragi famously saying that he wanted Sega to go software only and make games for PlayStation. And you got to imagine it was because of Virtua Fighter. Tekken was created to beat Virtua Fighter. The PlayStation 1 was created to mimic Virtua Fighter. And what better thing to do is there to have Virtua Fighter 4 exclusive to the PlayStation platform, especially when the Tekken 4 and the Tekken entry was, underwhelming at the time. Having Virtua Fighter 4 claimed to be the best in the series, and critically came out one of the best reviewed games on the console. I'd imagine Sony saw the opportunity to make it exclusive and did that. And it's the same with Shenmue. If you look back at that E3 when they had that, people call it the all-time great. It feels to me like cheap pops. In wrestling you have your cheap pops, and they say, they had the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which at the time I think was literally just a CGI trailer, and they had The Last Guardian, which had been in development hell for about a decade. So it was just like, look at all these lost games that we're bringing in, and I feel like they saw Shenmue was going towards a Kickstarter, and they've got some sort of financial agreement in there, which is why it stayed PlayStation only, and it hasn't come. The game's not all that demanding. I'm pretty sure you could get a version of Shenmue 3 running on the Switch. The fact that it's still PlayStation 4 only, and PC, says to me that they had some sort of foreclosure exclusivity deal on that, and I think that's what it is, possibly more than Yu Suzuki's preference. Maybe a bit of both, but that's my theory anyway.
We can only speculate, mate.
We can, and that's what we're doing right now. So, going back to the deal, then, if this proposed deal that I think this was back in 2020 that this was
Yeah.
mentioned in the email. So it's been a few years then, and as far as we know, there hasn't been any movement on this. So this is all obviously just speculation and hypotheses on our part. But we'll just go through what some of the benefits would be. So I've got a few on here. So benefits for Xbox would be access to Sega's huge IP library. Huge benefit to Microsoft. A lot of people, and this is a bugbear of mine, a lot of people say, I'd love it if Microsoft bought Sega. They could bring X series back. We'll get a new Streets of Rage. We'll get a new Shenmue. We'll get a new Nights into Dreams. And I feel like saying, well, it's taken the best part of 15 years, the best part of 2 decades to get a new Perfect Dark game. We haven't had a new Banjo-Kazooie game since 2008.
Yeah.
We're only just getting Fable after about a decade. Gears of War has gone missing. You've got all these rare franchises that are sitting, dormant, completely dormant. And you think, I don't think Xbox is the best at resurrecting those old IPs and giving them their service. So for me, huge benefit for Xbox, but not so much for Sega, I think.
No, I mean, anybody who thinks that Microsoft buying Sega would see a resurrection of, a new Jet Set Radio, a new Crazy Taxi, which are rumoured to be in the works from Sega themselves, but as of yet we've not seen them. But, as you said, Streets of Rage, Echo, all the classic franchises that would suddenly come flying back. No, that's just not going to happen, right? Because Rare, as you said, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, we had Rare Replay, and then we had Sea of Thieves. Now, don't get me wrong, Sea of Thieves has evolved into a very, very good multiplayer game. I didn't get into it personally, not my kind of thing, but people would have thought whenever Microsoft bought Rare that with the wealth of kind of legacy content they've got, that you would have seen a resurrection across the board. Again, another franchise, Killer Instinct.
Yeah.
One game, done great, got great reviews, vanished.
Yeah.
So they would have access to the IP, but it would be folly to think that they would just go straight in and just resurrect things. It's not something that I think would happen at all, just given Microsoft's track record of how not only they use the IPs that they acquire, but the ones that they create themselves. As you said, Gears of War. The thing is, people moaned about Halo, Gears, Forza, and then they put Gears away for ages, and then people go, where's Gears of War? It's like,
I like Gears 5 though. I really wanted a new Gears.
See, I wasn't a mass. I think again, we're not going to dwell on this too long, but I think the edginess that Cliff Bleszinski and the Epic guys brought to the franchise was lost whenever Microsoft basically bought the kind of rights off of Epic. I think the weapons aren't as heavy feeling, they're not as kind of clunky and kind of more like war machines in the first trilogy. They're really whenever you fire those lancers, they feel meaty. But I just think the kind of 4 and 5, well, Judgment was shite as well, to be fair. But 4 and 5, they were good games, they were impressive games, but they weren't for me good Gears of War games. So bring Cliff Bleszinski back, man. Come on.
What's he doing these days? I think he's got much going on. Next thing I've got is arcade and legacy hardware. So obviously, as everyone who watches the show knows, huge fans not just of all Sega consoles, but their arcade machines as well. So, conceivably, Xbox or Microsoft would have access to all of those legacy SKUs, hardware. They could emulate it. Look at something like Capcom Arcade Stadium, and the mind boggles like, why haven't Sega done something like that? But but Xbox conceivably could. Again, there's more IPs and more IP in terms of hardware and software emulation that they could have in their locker. And I don't know whether they'd actually do anything like that.
Well, I mean, whenever you look at the fact that the arcades were sold off, last year, is it Gigo or GIGO? It's like however you want to pronounce it, they've all been rebranded and certain arcades have been shut down. But again, we don't know how long that kind of decision, that deal was being made by Sega Sammy to sell those off. So maybe that deal was being discussed at the same time that Microsoft were inquiring about seriously acquiring Sega. So, it's as much as they sold off the physical arcades, you're right, the technology would still be there. Schematics, blueprints, whatever you want to call it, source code, anything that would still be there. Yeah. They would be able to, hopefully, maybe, again, it goes back to that, would they want to? Capcom Arcade is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I know.
I love the design of it, the fact that you can walk in and flick through the machines and the wee cabinets are there. And
it's almost like they stole your idea, mate.
Aye. When did I come up with that?
Years ago.
I know. See if they start selling wee poster packs and letting you kind of decorate your own arcade, mate. I'm suing somebody.
Yeah, that's it. Lawyer up, mate. I hear Microsoft have got some good ones.
Aye. I'll wait to see how they go with the FTC first.
But yeah, they're wicked, mate. And it's Microsoft would have access to that. Could they do anything for it? Sega could do something with it. But I mean, it's another benefit to Xbox, I guess. Legacy Xbox game by Sega become effectively first party. Now, does that mean games like Jet Set Radio Future? I mean, Panzer Dragoon Auto is one that we see that hasn't really gone away at all. But games that have strong ties to Xbox and Xbox 360 hardware back when that Xbox Sega relationship was really strong might become, if they're not already, backwards compatible and readily available. Obviously, they're not due for a negotiation between the two companies. That Microsoft will own them outright, and they'd be on Game Pass.
I mean, the fact that we've seen so many Sega games come to Xbox, through the Xbox Live Arcade and even beyond that, it makes me think that if there was a means for Crazy Taxi 3 and Jet Set Radio Future, and even, well, obviously Shenmue 2 get remastered, but like your Toe Jam and Errol's, these kind of things, if there was an ability to bring those over, they would have done it already. So is there something else in the background, possibly soundtrack wise? We've discussed that Concept of Love already appears in a Yakuza game when you go into one of the kind of the game parlors.
Yeah.
So is it something else on the soundtrack that stops that one? I don't know. But again, you are right that much like with the Activision Blizzard deal, like Call of Duty would go from being a third party game to being first party, and would automatically, legacy content and going forward would be on Game Pass. So for talk's sake, Sonic Superstars would be on Game Pass day one.
Yeah,
still be on PlayStation, but if you've got an Xbox, you get access to it for hee-haw on day one. So, it's just, you've got to wonder what there is in the background. But again, is it something that perhaps Microsoft would be more willing in the name of content? Because don't forget, I mean, the backwards compatibility program was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's a shame they stopped it.
I think if I remember, I can't remember the name of the guy that done the kind of drive around it, but they came out and said that they have exhausted pretty much all avenues in terms of content. Anything else that's out there is kind of tied up with some kind of license issue. Now, maybe Sega don't have the money, or Sega Sammy don't want to spend the kind of money to regain the license for X, Y, and Z, but Microsoft have got deep pockets. So maybe in the name of bringing that content over, that they may go and pay for the soundtrack for Jet Set Radio Future. Just, again, it's all surmising, but you're right, mate. Those games all instantly become first party. So
yeah, but I mean, for Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio, it's got to be the soundtrack. For Toe Jam and Earl, Sega don't actually own the IP, do they? I think
that's right.
The problem. I can't remember the guy's name. But he owns the IP. Sega basically licensed the characters for the free games.
Was he not on Twitter last year promoting a new game? I remember. I'm sure I've seen him on Twitter promoting. There was something.
He was on Twitter a lot talking about Toe Jam now, but I don't think it was a new game. Back in the Groove was out, but that's been out for a while now. I was trying to get a physical version of it and gave up in the end. Got the game for like, going on another tangent here, but I got the game for £3 via Xbox, which was obviously far cheaper than the £45 that the Switch and PS4 limited run games version. So as I always say, my position on the subject is printing limited copies of a game is not preservation.
No,
That it's, that's a limited number of people to play. It's just my view. It's deprivation of, that's not preserving the game for future generations to play. If it's only going to be 4,000 people, it's going to be stuck in a box, sat on a shelf forever, and passed from collector to collector. It's not allowing people to play it.
It's falsified demand, really, isn't it? Yeah, it's creating a demand that will drive up the price, because they know what the market's like. There's no need in the current day and age for this whole limited run kind of stuff. Just if the numbers are there and you've got the facility to make them, then why create that kind of market? Why help contribute to that? I don't understand it.
No, it's like there's a lot of people wanted the physical version. I can't remember what the game was. They wanted the physical version of a game, and the company Strictly Limited was like, we're only making 4,000. It's just like, if more than 4,000 people want it, make more. Jesus.
Rocket science.
Oh dear. But anyway, back on topic. So I've got huge library of games coming on Game Pass. They could have games like the Sega collections that were on Xbox. They could be on Game Pass. So that's bringing not just Xbox games, but games from Sega's past. You've got the Dreamcast collection, the Mega Drive collection. There's a couple of Master System games on there, the Model 1 and Model 2 games, like the Flying Vipers, Virtua Fighter. So that would be pretty good. And the last thing I've got is and I think this is the key driver from Microsoft's perspective, is that previously exclusive titles will come to Xbox for definite. There's no question then, because things like Persona, Shin Megami Tensei, Yakuza have all been the domain of the PlayStation.
Yeah.
And as far as Persona is concerned, later on, the Switch. And I think that was the biggest bugbear for Microsoft, is that they didn't have representation of those big franchises. And it's great for Sega, because those franchises are now becoming so in demand, so revered. And it brings a warmth to my blue Sega heart, the fact that Sega have these franchises that aren't Sonic the Hedgehog, but are still revered and loved throughout the industry. And I think that's fantastic. Obviously, love Yakuza. I'm enjoying Judgment. I loved I played of Persona, but I don't have 100 hours to finish the game.
Who does?
Yeah, I know. But no, I think that's, and I think that's, again, me as someone who does primarily play on Xbox in the modern day, that's been a frustration of mine, was that these games weren't coming to Xbox. And I've been enjoying them. I've been playing Soul Hackers, actually, which is another Atlas game, and that was very good. So I think that's that's another good thing for Xbox. I think that's good for the Xboxes and consumers across across all of video gaming, really. If everyone gets to play more Sega titles, then everybody wins, right?
Exactly, mate. I mean, and you've seen how well received the Yakuza games have been whenever they eventually did come to Xbox. Yeah. It's like, I mean, I would never have had access to them. Obviously I've not got an Xbox anymore, but I've got a 360. I'm not running a 360. But you've seen the demand, the Yakuza collection coming over those remastered games. People are loving them, playing them. That's it. There'll be no dubiety at all, no worry about any kind of future. As much as I think I don't like the way the Yakuza games have moved to that kind of turn-based thing and Like a Dragon. Before I like the whole kind of very Shenmue style roaming about, running around a corner and then battle and smacking folk with bikes and street signs, and then that's it. But there's no worry that any kind of future game would suddenly be locked away from them. So, and as you say, mate, those we cry out, and many cry out for a resurrection of the old franchises. We can't deny that these new ones are kicking ass, mate.
Yeah, but they really are, mate. I mean, Sega at the moment, and I think this is something we'll come on to in a little bit later in my notes, but they are on fire at the moment. You know, you got the success of the Sonic movies, the Sonic Frontiers is well received. You know, excitement for Sonic Superstars is white hot at the moment. You've got more Yakuza games coming. You got a couple more Atlas games coming. There's a new Total War game coming out. There's a couple of more. I can't remember. I can't remember what the new multiplayer game is called. But there's that's coming. Sega are firing on all cylinders at the moment. And while, you know, as retro Sega fans, it's not quite what we grew up with and what we know and love Sega for, Sonic aside, it's still fantastic to see the company actually doing really well.
Aye, that's it, mate. I mean, as we spoke about the kind of the death throes that they were in, you know, back in 2001, could we have foreseen as Sega fans back then, Sega being as, you know, vibrant and, you know, alive and creative in a whole new way that they are now? Back then, I could never have seen that.
No.
You know, so, you know, it's power to them. You know, the Sammy thing, as much as we kind of, and we've said this on Twitter, you know, that the Sega that we grew up with is no longer here after the whole Sammy kind of merger. They did change, and they had to. You know, they had to, you know, diversify. They had to kind of, I don't know, maybe become a tighter run ship, focus on less things, be really good at a couple of things instead of being kind of scattered all over the place. But, you know, aye.
Yeah. No, it is good to see them. And then, yeah, have you got anything more on the benefits to Xbox, mate?
No, I think we've pretty much covered them off, mate. I think obviously the main benefit to Xbox is it's that kind of double-edged thing. They have access to the IP. They own all the IP. They all become suddenly first-party IPs. But do we trust Xbox to actually do anything with them? That was the main one. You know, as I know you're a massive Yakuza fan, and we've just spoken about that kind of new legacy they're building with these brilliant franchises that are thriving, and obviously getting access to them day and date on Game Pass, nothing locked away. Massive benefits to Xbox. I can't see if they would really utilise the arcade hardware. I can't see why that may be a part of Sega that if it did still exist at that point, that they may have, because they're not really making too many bit of arcade. You can't.
They're not. I was thinking legacy, like, I mean, in the same way that we were talking about getting licenses for games like, you know, Toe Jam and all, Jet Set Radio, could they go and say, well, you know, let's do a Sega Model 3 collection. Don't worry, we'll get the licenses for Porsche and Ferrari, and we'll get Scud Race going. Or But unfortunately, I don't. But I mean, that would be the dream, you know. If I was Phil Spencer, that would be like, you know, I'd say, Satcher, you know, give me a few million quid on, you know, when we go and get the licenses for the next Forza game. I'll just say, look, can we get the licenses to put in these old Sega arcade races as well? Come on,
mate.
It's not going to happen.
If Spencer had ever managed to do that, see if he turned around and said that he would do that, then it would this deal would have my blessing. if he turned round and said that they will go and secure the licenses for all legacy Sega IP, I'd carry the man to Japan on my back myself and get the deal done. But alas, I don't quite think they would do that.
No, I don't. But as we're saying, mate, Sega is in a very good position. I think that leads us on nicely to the benefits to Sega. So the benefits I've got here is a huge increase in funding, possibly. It's quite vague how Xbox manage their studios, I think. Get kind of conflicting reports. Although maybe it's the difference between old Xbox and new Xbox. I mean, the Don Matrick era, they demanded that every game be kind of these online enabled 1 versus 4. You remember was it Fable Legends?
Yeah, he's a walloper, man. So he is. I'm sorry, bro.
No, but he really was an absolute tool. But yeah, they were, you know, getting right involved in all of the game design and everything. Whereas now you get the feeling that Microsoft are very hands off. You look at stuff like Halo Infinite and Redfall, and there does seem to be this kind of reports that Microsoft are perhaps too hands off, and there isn't enough involvement from senior leadership. So I don't know how that. And obviously, things like ZeniMax and Bethesda, they operate kind of on their own. They're kind of sub companies that are almost independent from Xbox, and it's kind of the same. It will be the same with Activision Blizzard. So, will there be an increase in funding? It's quite possible that there will be. I don't think it's by any means guaranteed.
No, as you said, mate, I think the way that they run Xbox Game Studios is that they are siloed. You know, they still exist as their own entity. I don't think, as you said, maybe wrongly, there's no Big Brother kind of watching them. I mean, I know Redfall took a lot of shit, but I think that was well into development before this whole deal went through. So
that sounded a lot like ZeniMax or Bethesda, sort of the Fallout 76 drama, where they've said, right, well, we need you to make an online game, and that's what you're making, even though you don't want to make it. You're making it and you're shipping it them. I think they're probably right. I think you agree with you, mate. I don't think that one's on Xbox.
No, it's that's kind of more like a kind of legacy that's left over from kind of deals that were made before, obviously, the acquisition happened. But I think Sega would obviously have access to the funding that Microsoft provide. I mean, you look at, like, obviously, as you said there, Bethesda operate independently, but you look at what the Starfield footage was like a year ago, and you look at it now, you know, it's a different game, you know, and I don't think it's just, you know, a wee bit of kind of TLC and a bit of kind of polish that's done with that. I think there's been some money flung at that to get it up to speed. So again, it's always go back to that kind of more cultural thing, though. It's like we know that Sega of Japan and Sega of America butted heads in the past. I don't know what the kind of Sega Sammy culture's like, but I don't know. I can't imagine like Sega's creative minds wanting to go to Phil Spencer and Satya and go, can we have some more money to make a game? I can't see that. I mean, maybe they would, but it just doesn't. It's not how I would think Sega would like to operate. I think they always like to be kind of more in control of their own kind of creativity. So I don't ever think, I don't know.
I feel like you're on the money. I mean, honestly, mate, that was a great point on Starfield. Then I think you were bang on the money. Then I think Starfield, because again, another thing that's come out of this court case is the fact that Bethesda. I think Pete Hines came out and said originally we were meant to ship Starfield earlier, and you get the feeling that Bethesda or ZeniMax would have said you've got to send it out now. You know, the original ship date. Whereas Microsoft seemed to look at it and say, look, take all the time you need. You know, we've got all the money. There you go. You can't help but wonder if that sort of approach had worked with something like Sonic Frontiers. But I think you make a great point about the culture there, mate. I get the feeling because Sonic Frontiers kind of went through development hell for a bit. I don't think it's public knowledge that they got to a point and then they scrapped the whole game and then rebuilt it again. And you can tell when you get to the end that they kind of run out of time and money. Now, Iizuka, I can imagine, you know, Iizuka gets a lot of criticism as head of Sonic team. But I think the guy really does embody kind of the mentality that you mentioned there, because he just kind of gets on with it and trucks on, and he has a vision and he has an idea and he knows what he wants to do. Sonic Adventure 2, he basically made himself as a director with a skeleton crew. I think the development team was like a quarter of the size of the original Sonic Adventure team. There's a great video. I'll share it with you. Maybe we'll share it in our show notes. But there's a great video where someone talks about the history of Sonic Adventure 2 and how that game was basically built on Death Rows on a shoestring budget. Frontiers is similar. Frontiers, the team noticeably way too small, not given enough time. My gut feeling is, could Iizuka have used more money and used more people? Quite possibly. Would he have gone to? Did he go to Sega? It's quite possible that he didn't, and that he just thought, you know what, it's just part of the culture, just to just push on and just get on with it.
And it's something that that's again a quite historical thing. I mean, if you even look at Sega, obviously, putting House of the Dead on Saturn,
yeah,
to Tantalus putting it, moving it to a third party to get them to develop it and giving them months,
yeah,
to get it done, with penalties, and a very small team by all accounts. So there is maybe something in that historically that perhaps that's just the way it's done. You've got a budget, you worked it, and don't dare come back and ask for more again. We're just surmising here, but there is examples through the years of where, as you say, maybe they ran out of time, ran out of money. They did the best with what they had with the team that they had left.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about modern video game crunch culture. I mean, we've both seen Panda's excellent Virtual Cop documentary where their team talk about, well, some days we were working like 18, 20 hours, but we loved it. But you don't hear all the crunch culture complaints coming out of Japan. You hear them coming out of Western developers, and they're the ones that are more vocal about it. And that doesn't mean that crunches don't happen in Japan. It's very obvious that they do, but maybe it's more embedded in the culture there that you work with what you got. So maybe the huge increase in funding won't be a huge benefit for Sega. I mean, it would be a benefit. And would they draw down on it? Would their culture be at odds with that sort of environment? It's certainly a very good question.
Mm-hmm. Certainly what we don't have the answer to, but it's a valid talking point. History has shown that Sega and their teams internally have operated like that in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that the extra Microsoft bucks would bring is extra financial stability. I mean, there's no chance of Sega going under with Big Daddy Microsoft backing them, although obviously there's still the chance that they could get wound down, spun off, sold off, etc.
Aye.
But there's still more financial stability with Microsoft's backing, of course.
I mean, they're not skint under Sammy. They've just spent like 700 million on Rovio, So, let's not paint Sega as being, skint and needing a payday loan to get to next month. They are worlds apart from where they were in 2001, as we've discussed. So the financial stability part, that little, and I suppose that wee point you made there could possibly be moved into the drawback section as well.
I've got it. I've got it. We will come to that later on. That's what I was saying. I've got,
been spun off, so we'll maybe, get to that in due course. But that was a kind of concern. But the financial stability means that they're not kind of going to go away anytime soon. But at the same time, I don't think there's any danger of that happening under Sega Sammy.
No, certainly not at the moment. They're in a really good place. And as we touched on, when we're going through the original notes, they'd still be in a position to publish multi-format, which, it was Okara himself that actually wanted Sega to be multi-format, and that kind of sticks to his wishes. He didn't even want the Dreamcast to happen, famously. So
nope. Aye, as I say, he gave Sega that 40 million to make it happen, to have one more go at it, to throw whatever they had at it. And, he had been telling Nakayama, he'd been telling Irimajiri before that, we have to get out of hardware.
Yeah.
And, I think it was, whether it was pride or whether it was just that passion that he wanted to see Sega, take on these companies and beat them, that he thought, let's just give it one more go. And, we got a hell of a console as a result. But yeah, it's always been Okawa's wish that Sega be hardware agnostic. That's just, he allegedly, from things I've read online, is that he believed that Sega's strength wasn't the hardware. It was obviously, not its home hardware. Obviously, it had faith in its arcade hardware. But, when it comes to being in the home, making your games available across every platform, and that's where we are. He wasn't around, sadly, to see it come to fruition, but the big man wanted it, and eventually Sega got there.
Yeah, and that's the soul still burns. So
the legend will never die.
Exactly. Anything else on the benefits for Sega, mate? I only had those three.
No, I mean it's very top heavy towards Microsoft. If you're the company being acquired, other than possible financial stability, then all the benefits go to the company making the acquisition. They're getting the IP, they're getting the technology, they're getting the brand. So, the benefits all lie with Xbox. The ones for Sega, even the financial stability part, as we said, is pretty. Even that's, as Murtaugh said to Riggs, it's pretty fucking thin,
Yeah.
because, and we've said this before as well, it goes to show how much stock that Sammy put in the Sega name. They acquired Sega, or they merged with Sega, and it became Sega Sammy. Sammy pretty much led that. They bought
Yeah.
they bought the shares. They essentially kind of merged with Sega, but were assimilated into Sammy. It's still Sega Sammy. It's no Sammy Sega. So
Yeah.
maybe they just thought it sounded better. I don't know. Maybe. But I think Sammy put a lot of kind of stock in the Sega brand.
Yeah, I agree, mate. I agree. On to some of the drawbacks, and I've got drawbacks for Xbox. These are all drawbacks for Sega, so they'll no longer be independent. Which even though they'll be multi-platform, their final say on whether a game will be exclusive or not is still down to Xbox and Phil Spencer. Again, as revealed in those court documents, when it comes to the Bethesda ZeniMax games, they are multi-format or can be multi-format, and the ones that are on, your Fallout 76s, your Elder Scrolls Online, they'll all remain platform agnostic. But at the end of the day, any new game or new IP, Phil has that final say. And if Izuka says, I want to make a new game for the Switch, Phil has the power to say, well, you can't.
Aye, I think if I remember for the Bethesda deal, if I remember the press statement, I'm sure they said that, games will be taken on a case-by-case basis. I'm pretty sure that was the wording of it. So, it kind of removes that train of independent thought, which in turn can have a knock-on effect in creativity.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're kind of being suppressed, you've got an idea, you know what platform you want to bring it on, you think that game, that vision for that game, like, I want to make a game for the Switch. I think it suits the Switch. It's suited to that hardware. It will be at home there. No.
Yeah, it's two big examples is stuff like the Wii. If there was another motion control revolution, we want to make a game for a new Nintendo console that's got motion controls. Well, you're not making a game exclusively for the rival. Oh, we want to make a game for VR. We want to use PSVR. No, you can't. So straight away, two different outlets, two different mediums of video gaming that Xbox do not offer. You're automatically shut down from.
Yeah, well, I mean, had the deal happen, but you wouldn't have Cosmic Smash or C Smash VRS, whatever it's called.
Yeah,
that because Wolf and Wood and Yorg obviously, had licensed that IP from Sega.
Yeah,
would that have happened had that deal gone through? Probably not.
Would have required Microsoft say so.
Mm-hmm. They might well have signed off on it, had no problem with it, but I still think somewhere down the line, Microsoft have got sights on some kind of VR for Xbox. I don't think they can hold. If it is going to keep growing, it needs to become a hell of a lot more affordable. For a start, headsets that cost the same price as a console they run on just isn't feasible for everyday gamers. But that's another topic for another day, mate.
Yeah. We'll talk Sega VR. When Sega big on VR, that's when we'll jump into it. Otherwise, we'll talk about the old headsets from Sega World in the 90s.
Sega Activator, yes.
Did you ever use any of those Sega old headsets? I think they had them in Sega World of the Trocadero. You ever seen Demolition Man?
Yes.
You know the scene where they have sex. So they sit at opposite ends and they put the helmets on. Basically, that's what it was like. It was like epilepsy inducing, like strobe in your eyeballs,
like the lawnmower man.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Hands stretched out in front of you.
Yeah, so that's as close as Sega guys are getting to VR at the moment. But I've got a note on here. So drawbacks for Sega: future mini consoles may be in doubt.
Wow.
Now, yeah, if you're Microsoft, are you going to invest in legacy mini consoles? Are you going to invest in the Master System Mini? Yeah. I can't see it.
No chance. They're not going to. No, that's just not going to happen. That's one thing that, and I know people were saying on Twitter, in response to our kind of legacy tweets, that they're riding the Mega Drive train a bit too hard and nostalgia can only go so far. But, the Mega Drive, let's cut to the chase, remains, it wasn't successful in Japan, but globally, thanks to Sega of America and its success in Europe, Mega Drive is the most recognised off-the-shelf Sega console. It's just because of the time it was a success that it had. That's why they keep going back to it. Now, I said to you on Twitter, I still think the next mini console will be a Master System. I really do. I don't think they're going to go Saturn and Dreamcast. But for me, there's no way in hell that on acquiring Sega that, Satya and Phil are going to turn around and go, yeah, keep spending money on making other hardware. That to me just looks like a complete, that's just shut down straight away.
There's a lot of expense and a lot of risk into something that may not yield a high reward. Now, obviously, Sega are seeing value in it. I mean, we've had 2 Mega Drive Minis and we had the Game Gear Micros, as well as the Astro City Mini and the Astro City V. But I can't see Microsoft being too keen to put hardware out. I just really can't. So yeah, I've got that on there. Conversations on future and current game development. So that's where most of the conversation is. But what does that mean for Sega's legacy? Now, we've talked about backwards compatibility, old IPs, but do we really think that Microsoft would be interested in Sega's back catalogue in bringing Dreamcast, Saturn, Mega Drive, Master System, hell, even SG-1000 games to service in some way? I just don't see it.
They might cherry pick a couple, but anybody who thinks you're all of a sudden going to get an emulated version of Panzer Dragoon Saga on Game Pass is up a gum tree. That's never going to happen. It's just, and let's not remember, Saturn emulation is getting better, but it's not 100% there yet. I think it's pretty close, but there's still some games that have got issues. So, and again, it's a whole licensing thing that we've discussed earlier. So yeah, it's a kind of grey area. I don't see, given Microsoft's track record of how they've used IP that they have acquired. I mean, as you said, look how long it's taken Fable. And I get that people will be going, but it takes years to make a game, and I know that when it was announced, it was just literally like a splash screen, and then we had the other trailer with the frog kind of, is it the wee kind of fairy girls flying through the forest and stuff, and then the most recent one we've had where they said it was actual, engine using Forza tech, which looked lovely, and I know these games take an awful long time to get there, but again, it's like it took long enough to, like, you've had access to Fable for how long, and it's taken all this time. I can't see them putting any kind of stock in going back to bring like Panzer Dragoons Vi and Virtua Fighter 3 for the Dreamcast, games that are kind of trapped on their host hardware. Well, Vi's meant to be getting a remake, but I've still not seen anything. So
I'll ask you this, mate. So the Xbox is now 22 years old, so has a longer hardware history, home gaming hardware history than Sega did. How many retro releases? And I don't mean necessarily remakes, but how many retro releases have Xbox actually had on their hardware? I can only think of one.
Of their own franchises?
Yeah.
You're talking Gears Ultimate?
Oh, I was thinking, so I think, you've got, all I was thinking of was Rare Replay. It's the only kind of retro compilation they've got. Other than that, I suppose we've got Gears Ultimate, Halo 1 and Halo 2 Anniversary Editions. Beyond that, what is their retro output? I mean, they've got a lot of games that they could go back and, bring back and put into retro collections, and they just don't.
Aye, it seems to be the kind of the drop games, and then, again, want to look at, I know as Xbox One's no retro, right? But I mean, it kind of, the point fits because you look at Rise, right?
Yeah.
That had the potential to go on and be a great franchise. It was a fantastic launch game. It looked absolutely stunning. It's still in places, looks stunning today. But they just dropped it.
Yeah.
You know, Sunset Overdrive, they had an opportunity to really explore that beautiful, vibrant, colourful game, and then we lost Insomniac to Sony. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's like they don't. I just don't know. You're right. They don't seem to kind of put a lot of. If they don't care enough about their own legacy,
Yeah.
do we trust them to actually give a shit about Sega?
Yeah.
You know,
I think the only other one we've had Gears Ultimate, Halo 1, Halo 2, the Rare Replay, and GoldenEye, I think, is obviously the most recent one, which is part of Rare Replay technically, but
aye, it's an update if you own the online version, but people who've got the disc obviously can't get access to it apparently.
it's weird.
But then the 360 remake or 360 port is apparently the one that was banned is apparently better than the one that's just came out.
Yeah. Bizarre,
Madness.
mate. Bizarre. But yeah, I don't see them giving that back catalogue much consideration. But the last point I've got on here, and I know we're talking about the benefits to Sega just now. We only had 3, and 2 of them were, we had caveats around. And here's the biggest asterisk: they're beholden to Microsoft budget and cuts. And we know in the news, was it this year or last year, they had the sweeping job cuts across all of Microsoft, 10,000 jobs, wasn't it? Of which I've got most notably 343 Industries saw severe cuts so that Halo, Xbox's biggest franchise, is now working with a skeleton crew who said, right, well, we could either make new multiplayer content or make new cinematics. We couldn't do both, so now we're focusing on content, which is the right decision. But this is your top franchise, and this is how you're treating it. If they're like that with their internal teams, Sega wouldn't be immune if they're acquired.
Yeah, no, it's spot on, mate. That is the kind of worry. Just one wee thing, because there might be people shouting because we're talking about when does Xbox seldom do retro releases. Let's not forget, and it's not their IPs, but we can't ignore not just the backwards compatibility program, but the Xbox One X and Series X and Series S enhanced. So they have taken old content, albeit not theirs, and they have made sure that the games run better than they ever did on their host hardware. So just because there were probably people watching screaming about that, and I wanted it in, FPS boost as well, going back and somehow with these algorithms and this technology to make these games run better without any recoding. This magic thing that they do, I don't know how they do it. It is impressive that they managed to upscale 360 games to 4K and things like that. So, they might not do their own kind of franchises much justice in terms of kind of legacy releases, but they do a lot for legacy on the platform as a whole for third parties. So as that came to me there, and I went, I better go back and just.
I think, saying that, mate, I probably were a little bit harsh. I mean, they do great stuff with backwards compatibility, and I think when we're talking about Rare Replay, a lot of the stuff like the Perfect Dark remake, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, they also got kind of remakes for Rare as well, so they kind of count. But I still think they're still they're not Nintendo levels of bringing your franchises up. This is not a uniquely Microsoft issue. This is PlayStation as well. PlayStation are appalling at they're absolutely atrocious at. I mean, it doesn't help that pre-2000 they barely had any first-party games anyway, but they are appalling at respecting their back catalogue. And it's not a uniquely Microsoft problem. Microsoft have got some great compilations, mostly on the Rare side, a couple of good remakes as well, and their backwards compatibility, as you've rightly said, mate, is fantastic. But does that point to a Microsoft or Xbox that is going to give Sega games their time in the sun, the retro Sega games, the airtime and the respect that their legacy deserves? I don't think it does.
No. As I say, my stance and my view on that doesn't change, but I just think that, there would have been people possibly shouting that. And as I say, they do a hell of a lot to improve older generation games right the way back to the OG Xbox and bring them right up to spec. But, again, they can only work within the confines of licenses and what they are able to touch. And again, would they go back and really spend that much time to go back even further into like Sega Saturn and Dreamcast, even further into Mega Drive territory? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either, mate. Anything else on the drawbacks for Sega?
No, I think we've pretty much covered all the bases in, mate. As I say, that thing you said about the cuts, if something like Halo, the golden egg of Xbox, the game that rode the Xbox into the market, if that's not safe and the team making that aren't safe, then
yeah,
what chance of Sega got, if there was to come to that? So yeah, that would be a serious worry, is that they would be, severely cut back to the extent that their creativity was stifled significantly.
Yeah, I agree, mate. So I think that's the pros and cons. And now I think we can move on to the will it, won't it? I've also got a note in here. Also, industry consolidation sucks, which I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. Maybe some not so much, but yeah, I think that's under the drawbacks for me. I think that's probably more of a personal view. Yeah, I don't want to live in or I don't want to be, I don't think I'll enjoy the hobby so much if it all just came under a few umbrellas,
No, it's the whole kind of monopolization of, you're going to end up where you're going to have like Tencent alone X amount, Sony alone X amount, Microsoft, and you just have Nintendo doing their own thing. And that's quite scary, but that you would potentially have all these kind of monopolies. I mean, Retro Boy John put a tweet out about, he's fed up seeing people complaining about exclusives. And if you grew up in the 90s, the exclusives were a massive part. And I've got a tweet in my draft to actually reply to. My battery was about to run out as I was typing it. Exclusives, I don't have a problem with them. I never have done, because for me, exclusives have always been like the character of the console. Like, if you look at Nintendo consoles, Mario; Sonic consoles, Sonic; Xbox, Halo. They embodied, they were the identity of those platforms. And I know obviously now we get Sonic and Mario at the Olympics and all that kind of stuff, and that's all water under the bridge. We accept that Nintendo gets Sega games right. We're fine with it, honest. But it's like, I just think this whole world where everything is owned by a select few companies is quite scary.
Yeah, I think you've got your indies, but then you've got your Embracer Group, Tencent, Sony, Microsoft, EA, and Take-Two, and between them they own about 90% of the market. Now, yeah, I agree with John and what you're saying, and I think we touched on this in Year Zero, in our Year Zero video, in that. It was a Year Zero podcast that we converted to a video recently, but we say in that how in the Saturn, PlayStation, N64 days, they all did things differently. And there are actually very, very few games that cross over to all three, or even just two of those. And it's the same in the SNES and Mega Drive era. Games look vastly different between the two. And often when you were playing a game on each platform, they look different, they play different, they weren't ports. Now, there are some games that I do think I do prefer them to be multi-platform. Street Fighter is a big one. Games with that sort of gravitas, with that sort of iconography, so they're almost superstars. And then and Street Fighter was great on the SNES and the Mega Drive, and there's no reason why it can't. But back in the day, each console would have its own extremely unique library of games, and it wasn't just a few exclusives. It's that they were genuinely just very different pieces of hardware doing very different things. I think the frustration now is you see PC, you see PlayStation 5, 4, you see Xbox One and Series. They all basically do the same thing. It's not like they all approach 2D or 3D in different ways. They all do exactly the same. Even the Switch does 3D basically exactly the same. And I suppose that kind of homogenization of the industry is kind of why there's an expectation for more games to be multi-platform and less exclusives. But yeah, it's still a valid point.
Aye. What you said there about, and we've mentioned it before on here, that that visual style. Like just now, you could pick if you could take a screenshot of a PC game, an Xbox game, and a PlayStation game, an unnamed, unreleased game, and you'd be next to impossible to actually tell them apart. Maybe the PC would be more detailed and like proper ray tracing or that kind of stuff might stick out. The fidelity on like a high-end PC version would obviously be quite easy to spot. But PS5 and Xbox Series X side by side, there's nothing. They're the same. The same. It's PC technology. They're miniaturized PCs now. You know what I mean? So, go back to like N64. People called it blurry. You had the texture warping on PS1, but that kind of smoothness at times to it, that kind of very distinct. The PS1 had such a stark, unique visual style, as did the Saturn. Like you could throw any screenshot up of a PlayStation game. Like you could put Toshinden up side by side, for example, Saturn and PlayStation. You know which one's what.
Yeah.
It's because of the transparencies and the different kind of visual effects on it. They just came at things from two totally different angles because of the way the hardware was set up. Now it's all just very standardized, as we've said, mate. There's no identity anymore at all.
No, absolutely, mate. Yeah, and more homogenization isn't going to improve the situation. It's just going to make it worse. But there we go. Right, mate. Why could this merger happen? Why is there this? Why does this sit out there in a realm of possibility? Now, first thing I've got is that Microsoft themselves said that even after our Activision Blizzard, and even if that deal falls through, they've got 69 billion in their pocket, probably burning a hole. But even if they acquire ABK, they said they're not done with acquisitions. They still want to buy more. So I've got that as a reason why it could happen.
Aye, and I think, ironically, Sega acquiring Rovio might actually inadvertently make them more attractive because it taps into that mobile market.
Absolutely. Oh god, I haven't written it down, but I had that exact same thought earlier.
Yeah, hive mind, mate. That's it. Never goes away.
Yeah, because it's true. That's what Microsoft are playing this up more than anything else. This is a play for the mobile market, and they've said that the console market is, in terms of growth, it's basically stagnant. You can only sell so many consoles. And they've said that the real growth is in mobile, and ironically, buying Rovio immediately makes Sega more attractive.
Yep, I mean the K of ABK is king, which is obviously your Candy Crush guys.
Yeah,
so that's a massive market, and as I said, Rovio, as much as you slag off Angry Birds, it was a phenom. Rovio again. So, it does ironically make them more attractive than they were in 2001.
Yeah, it was a phenom. It still is a phenom. I think that still pulls in $200-300 million a year.
Madness, mate.
Excuse me. I've got Sega Sammy market cap is $5 billion compared to ZeniMax, which is $7 billion, and ABK, obviously the purchase is at 69, so it's a fraction of $69 billion. So as far as affording it, Microsoft can easily afford it. It's less than Nokia, I think.
Mate, that's for Sega Sammy. That's not just for Sega. That's the whole lot. The whole kit and caboodle, as they say. So, that's quite terrifying. That's like us finding a fiver down the back of the couch. That's pretty much. Satya scratches his ass and finds a couple of quid in his denim pocket. It's like that's pocket change to them.
Yeah, it's some Xbox beer money, isn't it?
I'll
get these in, right, lads. Sega and Microsoft have a long relationship, so it dates back even back to the 32-bit era. There was, what was I reading the other day, or there was some discussion around, I think it was the development kits or something for the Sega Saturn, or maybe there was something around the Sega Saturn design that was, that Microsoft had some sort of finger in. And obviously they're, Windows CE for the Dreamcast. Obviously there was the Sega games that went to Windows. And then, as we talked about, there was the relationship, the exclusive games. We've got two Sega and Xbox, Sega and Xbox, and Sega and Xbox 360. We'll probably stick some buttons down here for you to to click on if you haven't seen those. But so there is a strong relationship there, and I think it fizzled out a bit in the Xbox One era, but I think it's back now.
Aye, I mean, ironically, as much as we've spoken about, like Shenmue 3 and VF4 in the PS2 days, excuse me, Sega have always had quite a strong relationship with Microsoft, you know what I mean? And they've always kind of, even though there might have been a wee bit of kind of maybe bitterness or resentfulness that, Microsoft didn't at that time help save the company kind of thing. Always think it's quite kind of funny, like seeing people before putting parallels with Apple.
Yeah.
It was like also Microsoft did the deal with Apple. I think it was around Office, that kind of influx of cash at the time when Steve Jobs came back in '97, it helped save Apple. Almost like in a kind of similar way that Microsoft, before Okawa-san passed away, that them buying Sega could have saved them, kind of thing. But it's don't know, mate. I just, as you say, that $5 billion cap, that's just they could just literally walk in and just pay that, no questions asked.
They could. On the relationship, though, obviously there was the Sega Super game.
That's right.
It's heavily tied to Microsoft technology. I think they've got the license with Microsoft to using the Azure servers as well. So,
yep.
So that strong relationship still exists, and perhaps that's why we see so many Sega games on Game Pass. And which leads us on to the next point, which is that Yakuza, Atlas Games, they have a strong Game Pass presence now. As I said, I was playing Soul Hackers 2, which is on Game Pass. That was actually a Game Pass quest that I thought, right, well, I'm not going to have enough time to play through this game. I'll give it a buzz. I ended up playing it for a few hours and ended up absolutely loving it. So once I'm done with Street Fighter 6 and Zelda, hopefully before I get pulled in by Starfield, I'll be giving that one a look. And even if I don't, I think that one might be, if it falls off Game Pass, I think I'm going to play that one down the line. But that aside, great Sega stuff on Game Pass these days.
Aye, and again, not just the Game Pass aspect, but Xbox Live Arcade. I think it was it E3 2006, maybe 2007, where I love going back and watching old E3s, and they made a big deal about Sonic the Hedgehog coming to Xbox Live Arcade, and it was like, you can play Sonic the Hedgehog today on Xbox Live Arcade. And I need a free trial as well. All the arcade games came with a free trial. So, they've always had that kind of link, not just in terms of Game Pass, but going back to Xbox Live Arcade as well. So, it just goes back to that whole relationship thing. Obviously, the Yakuza games, as we've seen, like they're quite weird. Like they for a period were going off and on. It was like they were on for a while, then they announced they were going off, and then they appeared again. It was like, we'll just gear them back.
No, it was weird because they had Zero One was on first, and then they added Kiwami and Kiwami 2, which are the remakes of 1 and 2.
Yep.
And then they added the remaster collection, which is 3, 4, and 5, and then they added 6. I was like, we've got the whole lot on there. And then they took the first 3 off. So 0, 1, and 2, they took them off. And my son was annoyed because he's like, I was enjoying that Yakuza 0. And I ended up buying it on PS4 because you can't get the physical editions of Yakuza on Xbox. And then they brought all of them back, so they're all on there now. And Like a Dragon's on there as well.
That's right.
And Like a Dragon, I've actually just ordered finally. I got it for a deal like £7 or something. But I thought sometimes with Game Pass games, I'm like, I don't want to start it if I know it's going to come off Game Pass.
Mate, we've all done it. I mean, we've also been done the other way where you buy a game and then it goes on Game Pass. I had a really nasty habit of doing that. I bought Dirt 5. I got it for £25 at the sale, and I thought, I've held out. I've got it for £25. 3 days later, coming to Game Pass next month, Dirt 5. I'm like, you bastards.
It's up. It's like I was putting off Tekken for ages. Tekken 7, I was like, I'm not going to buy Tekken. All right, I'll buy Tekken. And I bought a Tekken. I bought it when my wife was taking me away to Toulouse for my birthday. And at the airport, it was in Curry's for sale for £5. I was like, right, Tekken 7, I'll buy that. Put it in my bag. Came back from Toulouse on the Sunday night, On the Monday morning, I looked on Game Pass, and it was on Game Pass. I was like, "You fucking kidding me?"
At least it was only a fiver, mate.
At least it was only £5. Yeah, it was 25 quid.
At least you didn't pay 70 quid for the Legion of Dawn version of Anthem.
Oh god, yeah. Oh no.
I get suckered by, what was it, how long did they give you again? They gave you like X amount of hours, like 5 hours or something. And oh, this is great. And my mech's flying about and I'm into battles with people. This is fucking brilliant. And then little did I realise that the trial literally took you up to as much as the game was ever going to show you.
It's a shame, Anthem.
It's £1 in CEX, mate.
Yeah.
£1.
They just left it to die in the end, which is a shame.
They did. Yep. Sad times.
Yeah, indeed. The last thing I've got for why it could happen that Xbox are keen for a Japanese studio so they can diversify. Obviously, they got Tango Gameworks under Bethesda. But yeah, they want more of a Japanese presence because they are just a non-entity in Japan.
I think the ship in Japan has well and truly sailed, mate. I really don't think there's any coming back for Xbox as a brand in Japan at all.
No.
We're 4 console generations into it now. You know, obviously, the first Xbox was far too big. It was too bulky. I know they had the Controller S, and even the Controller S in Japan was smaller than the Controller S that we got in the West. But it's just I think the whole kind of shooter box kind of thing. I know on 360, I remember Peter Moore standing on stage and it was Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey. They tried back then. 360 was the most popular Xbox has ever been, and they even pushed the boat out and tried to get bespoke Japanese RPGs to try and shift consoles, and the Japanese audience just did not lap it up. So I think I don't think that Xbox having Sega would in any way all of a sudden make Japanese gamers flock out and buy an Xbox.
No, possibly not. I mean, 2 thoughts on that though. First of all, again, a lot of people have said, you know, if Xbox just bins the whole Xbox brand out there and then just released everything as Sega, the Sega Series console. I would buy a Sega Series Xbox in a heartbeat. You know, if it was called the Sega, whatever, Sega Series, whatever.
It's got a nice ring to it, into the Sega Series X.
Yeah. Ooh. Instead of a
make the power light orange on the Series S.
Orange
back to the Dreamcast. White with an orange power light.
Yeah, so that's something they could do. The other thought that I was having when you talk about, you was like, 4 times of asking now that they've been putting a console out and it's failed. I mean, there was another company that had to wait until the 6th time of asking essentially before they got any success. They failed with the SG-1000. They failed with the Mark II. They failed with the Mark III. They didn't get anywhere with the rebranded Master System. They didn't really make any headway with the Mega Drive. But when the Sega Saturn came around, they finally got some sort of success. Although that was over a period of 15 years or 14 years rather than 20. But
and again, that's why the Sega Saturn is so revered by Japanese Sega fans and even former executives, because it's the console that beat Nintendo in Japan, and that's all they cared about. We finally beat these bastards after so long.
It's like that meme, you know, that meme with the guy that's cheering with the medal and it pans out and he's third place on the podium.
So no.
Any more thoughts on why it could happen, mate?
It's as sad as it sounds, I think Microsoft's sheer persistence.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
I think once they have their heart set on it, look at the ABK thing, like everybody else is signed off in this deal. And this whole thing with the FTC and obviously, you know, Jim Ryan being a bit of an underhand so-and-so, and the way it's kind of put a real kind of being a bonnet, like a real fire under them. And they're fighting it. They're fighting it with everything. They believe in the deal. They've got the money to spend. They want the content. They want the company. In the terms of ABK, it's probably the best thing for the company. We've heard all about the kind of toxic nature of it. I think Phil Spencer and Satya going in there and just gutting it in terms of a kind of executive level is, I think I would imagine that a lot of the employees of ABK are quite looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the reasons why it could happen is just Microsoft's sheer persistence and brute force that if they want something, they've got the muscle to go after it. But now they've shown that Satya puts a lot of stock in the gaming aspect. Him and Phil are very aligned. You know, I still have, in the past, you know, Steve Ballmer, to his credit, you know, he allowed, you know, Peter Moore to go and, you know, the $1.1 billion problem and get the red ring dealt with properly. But now with Satya, he believes in gaming as a core part of Microsoft's income. It's not just a wee side project. They see it as a core cog in the machine now. So I think if Phil turns around and says to Satya that he wants Sega, then by Christ, they'll go after him.
It's a good point, mate. I mean, if you look at Microsoft now, their position in the mobile OS space, they tried. I had a Windows phone. I loved it. They tried and they failed. Their bread and butter, you know, their home OS is kind of under threat. Edge is not the Chrome killer that they want it to be.
No.
Google Chrome still owns the majority of the market. Windows itself is under threat. Obviously, you've got Linux that's getting more and more accepted, especially with Steam OS and things like that are using it. But then Chromebooks are rising to prominence, you know, and then you've got stuff like Google Docs, and none of these are probably going to be as widely accepted as Office, but Office and Windows monopoly is slowly being chipped away.
Yeah.
And you start thinking, well, what other growth opportunities are there out there for Microsoft right now? And the answer is gaming. And even if they say that console sales are stagnant, the fact that they've identified mobile as a growth opportunity really does, you know, if that is their biggest window for growth opportunity. Obviously, they've got cloud, you know, Azure servers and everything like that is a huge growth segment for them. Albeit, again, they're competing heavily with Amazon and Google there as well. So, I think as far as an opportunity for them to grow the business, then they just might do it.
I mean, was it Phil or someone from Microsoft or Xbox that said that the goal was to reach 3 billion gamers?
Yeah.
You're only doing that with smartphones and tablets. So that's the goal. And in a way, it almost kind of comes back to Sega and a kind of really, you know, Dreamcast up to 6 billion hits. And here we go. Here's Xbox want to make it, you know, 3 billion gamers. So, you know, end of the day, they want, you know, 50% of the world playing games, more or less, you know. So the only way to do that, as I said, is the thing is, like, people kind of don't realise, I think, because there was a period in mobile gaming not long after the 3GS came out where you started to kind of get console level ports coming to smartphone.
Yeah.
Like, I remember playing like Need for Speed. It was either on Underground, I'm sure it was. It was a great wee port, cost a £5. It was a cracking game. And you started to get stuff like XCOM, like Bioshock on iPad was ambitious as hell, and it was decent. I paid 20 odd quid for that. And, you know, because of the whole 32 and 64-bit split, never got updated and I lost it. But, you know, they were doing that. That was back in like 2008-9. You know, now these phones get replaced every year, right? There is nothing that ever comes out on them to stretch them. Like, I remember when I went from like the 3G and I missed the 3GS and I went to the 4, you know, retina display, 4 times the pixel count, super smooth screen. The performance, you could feel the performance jump. You know, the animations in iOS were really smooth. Scrolling was smooth. Everything about it was just a step up. You don't get that now because they're so powerful, these devices, that like they're replaced after a year.
Yeah.
So you never ever see any piece of software written for them that really pushes the silicon that's in these. So you've got to think that, like, surely the silicon, the SoCs that are in these smartphones and even your tablets now as well, like, they're just ripe to run pretty. They're not going to run Series X games, but they can still run visually. I mean, do you remember Infinity Blade?
Yeah, I was going to mention Infinity Blade.
Jesus Christ, how good that was done! That was an Unreal.
Yeah.
That was done, and back then that was like 2010, and that looked fucking insane for a
Like a
mobile
AAA
phone.
game, didn't it?
You're only swiping left and right,
Yeah.
in blocks and things, but visually it was stunning. So you think how far the tech has come in mobile devices in 13 years? That's why they want King and why they may want Rovio as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, mate. That's a good point. I think that's a great one to land on why it could happen. So that's why it could. Here's why it won't. And I think we're both aligned on this and saying, right, I think we can talk about the pros and the cons, but I am probably 95% sure that it won't happen for these reasons.
I mean, I put that tweet out saying Microsoft will never own Sega. Someone replied and said screenshotted, and I'm like, screenshot as much as you want, pal. You can print it out in A2 paper, or what you want, stick it in your wall for all I care. Laminate it, put bulbs in it. I don't really care, because, in my opinion, it's 99.99% never going to happen.
Yeah. So reasons I've got for that is, obviously, we've touched on it already. It's an extremely complex vertical acquisition. Now, it's a US company acquiring a Japanese one. There would be a lot of scrutiny already. Microsoft are getting a lot of scrutiny for the ABK deal, which has caused an awful lot of kind of investigation into the nature of their Bethesda deal, of their ZeniMax deal. Getting this one through the political and governance minefield between Japan and the US, particularly Japan, would be, I think, nigh impossible.
Aye. As we touched on earlier, mate, it's a kind of the whole cultural thing as well. It's not really heard of when you see like a Western company acquiring a Japanese one now.
Yeah.
Obviously, Sega in its early days was an American company, but then, Sega then, obviously took it over as the guys that had founded Sega, went to Japan, and well, the story's out there. We know the history behind how that happened, but there was something I was reading, I'm trying to find it, I'd bookmarked it as well for the actual, the financial aspect of it, and I'm annoyed that I've actually not got it here, but there was something about, I had it actually sitting there ready to look at, and I've just completely shut all my tabs down on my phone. But it was something about, in terms of, they've got to report a certain amount of percentage of earnings. It's really, everything's put under real scrutiny. Mm-hmm. Is the kind of the gist of it. Even more so than you're probably seeing with like the ABK deal, which, to be honest, is more like kind of petty squabbling now over what feels like the FTC being in Sony's corner. This is all down to making sure that, the preservation of the Japanese company is retained, more or less.
Yeah. So extremely difficult. What makes it even more messy is the nature of Sammy themselves. So the Sega Sammy portfolio is not just Sega, and I think people are a lot of people just see Sega and they don't realize what Sega Sammy is. I mean, Sega Sammy is a holdings company and Sega is part of that. But Sega Sammy own casinos, hotels, bars, golf courses, anime studios, music labels. The governance and the regulatory implications in buying all of those things in a foreign country, when I don't think Microsoft currently has any sort of exposure to any of that. Or no. I would imagine in that sort of acquisition, there would need to be some sort of transfer of licenses and ownership and all that sort of stuff. And at which point it becomes a gigantic ball ache for Microsoft.
Aye, it's as we spoke about earlier. Sega Sammy's market cap is $5 billion. So if they buy them, they're buying these casinos, they're buying these hotels. Microsoft don't want to run golf courses, mate. Right? So, and again, because of the legislation around the preservation of the Japanese firm, the scrutiny under the takeover would be you wouldn't just be allowed to walk in and go, we're only buying them because we want Sega. We're shutting the hotels, we're shutting the golf courses. That just would not. Now we're not. I've seen some people as well being quite cheeky on Twitter, going, "Oh, here come the Japanese law experts." And we're not Japanese law experts, but basic common knowledge tells you, because of the way that whole setup is, the whole preservation of the Japanese company, is that a Western company couldn't just come in, buy Sega Sammy to get Sega and then just bin everything else.
Yeah.
If, I mean, I suppose perhaps once the ink has dried on the contract, technically, they could maybe do what they want. But again, it's Microsoft don't want to be spending money to run hotels and casinos and golf courses and that. It's not happening. And splitting Sega out of Sammy, again, as we've said, Sammy put a lot of stock in the Sega brand. Obviously, Sega sold off their arcades, their physical arcades. They're gone now, which was a kind of sad thing. Those famous, red buildings all over Japan. They're in the Yakuza games as well. They're just so iconic, and we all remember seeing photographs of them at Sega Saturn magazine and Edge back in the day, and always dreamed of going there. So, it's a massive, massive minefield. A ball ache is what you called it. Microsoft don't want to take all that on. That's just an absolute non-starter. That they were really going to do music labels in Japan.
Yeah, I know. What are they going to do with an anime studio? They're going to try and take Sony's anime empire on.
Well, Crunchyroll and stuff like that.
That's it, yeah. So, and as you say, mate, the next point I've got in here is splitting Sega from Sammy would be of very little interest to Sammy themselves and would be extremely difficult because Sega right now are the golden goose for Sammy. It's their best asset. So Sammy aren't going to be keen to let their key asset go.
No.
And the thing is, the documentation says that Microsoft valued Sega at $2 billion. So that valuation is miles away. I mean, I know we talked about that Sega Sammy's market cap is $5 billion, but $2 billion for Sega themselves, for all those IPs, to take them away from Sammy and go, you keep your hotels, your golf courses, your studios and cars, we'll just take. No chance in hell are they going to take anything like that, which means that in terms of valuation, they're billions of dollars apart already.
Aye, I mean, we've already spoken about like your Personas, your Yakuzas, the fact that these are new franchises that are creating their own legacy and bringing a hell of a lot of money into the Sega Sammy group. There's no way in hell that they're going to go, you know what? You just take all that and we'll be left, as you say, with the golf courses and the casinos and, the bars and the anime studios. Like, Sammy would literally go under more than likely, because, as you say, Sega is the kind of golden goose as part of them. Obviously, Sammy, merging, bringing Sega in, assimilating them into them at a time when, they were 2004 that happened. So you're talking about they were still recovering from the Dreamcast, era. They played the long game. Sammy played the long game, and now they're benefiting for it. They're not just going to turn around and go, no bother, mate, there you go. It's like, because at the end of the day, Sammy and the Sega Sammy group have nursed Sega back to health, aided by Okawa-san's very kind waiving of debt and personal kind of, the shares that he gave back to the company. But they've put the time and the effort in to help build all these franchises back up again.
Yeah.
These new franchises. So it's just, there's absolutely no benefit to Sammy at all of stripping Sega out. It's just an absolute non-starter. It
is, mate. A couple more points, as if there weren't enough nails on the coffin. There's a couple more. But the next one I've got in here is that unlike ZeniMax and Activision Blizzard King, there is no scandal surrounding Sega at the moment. There is no ill will within the industry, as far as I can see. They are beloved within the industry at the moment. You know, the support for the LGBTQ community is got them in very high regard. They're a very open and warm and welcoming company, which they always have been, but now they seem to have that, but modernized. But add to they're a very progressive company, but they're also making extremely good games, which are all reviewing well, drilling up a lot of excitement. They've had 2 Sonic movies. They've got a Streets of Rage movie in development, a 3rd Sonic movie, a Knuckles movie, a Knuckles series, a Sonic series. They've got all this other media that seems to be surrounding them at the moment. They're on the up. ZeniMax, meanwhile, I think they were going through a little bit of turbulence themselves before they were bought. Fallout 76 was an absolute nightmare. It was
dog shit.
It was, they walked away from that looking absolutely terrible. And I think that they were struggling a little bit. You look at the fact that they're trying to rush Starfield to a date, the fact that they were actively looking for people to partner up with. They went to Sony to draw up the exclusivity deals for Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo and That's Starfield. Right. So they were kind of out there asking for help. Activision, again, all the scandal that came out of that, absolutely, as you said, mate, absolutely toxic. Their share price took a hit, and it was them that went to Microsoft that said, "Would you like to buy us?" They wanted to be bought, because both of those companies were at a point of weakness. Sega, right now, are not weak.
No,
they're smaller. They're a smaller fish, a much smaller fish, but they are not a weakened fish.
They're a well-oiled machine, mate. That's, they were Publisher of the Year. What was it,
2021?
2021, so, aye, as you said, mate, going from strength to strength, as we've said before, pushing forward on these new franchises that are making them plenty of money, are getting great reviews, are beloved in the community. And as you said, again, all the stuff they're doing behind the scenes, their social stuff, their culture, everything about them, there's no ill will at all. There's no scandal, nothing. They're just plodding on, doing great things. There's no reason at all. And people might go, well, that's why Microsoft want them. And maybe it is.
Yeah.
They might be a small company, but the way they're run, the way that they're structured, everything about it just screams at it being absolutely nigh on impossible to actually make it happen.
Yeah. 2 more points I've got in here. One, that Sega were a significant name, but they were mentioned alongside Bungie. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the article mentions that there were 12 companies. So that's 10 other ones. I mean, people were just seeing the biggest names in there, Sega, Bungie. I think that Capcom was in there as well, actually.
Capcom are on fire, mate.
Oh, my God. They are Publisher of the Year at the moment. They are incredible.
They're like Leo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street. 5 coupons. Just, how many hits can you fire out? Jesus.
Street Fighter 6, mate, is, oh my God, it is outstanding. I have put so much my missus brought a friend over tonight, and Tash was just eating her dinner when she came over, and I thought they were going to sit in the dining room and have a chat, but she brought her dinner in here, and I was like, "Are you eating in the living room?" Went, yeah. So, all right, we'll just have one game. 10 games later, I thought you were going upstairs. I thought you were going downstairs into the office. Yeah, sorry. I'm absolutely hooked on Street Fighter 6. It's incredible. And Resident Evil 4 again, another banger. But yeah, Capcom, again, another Japanese company that's going from strength to strength at the moment. And that Microsoft probably got absolutely no chance buying. But if anyone's at a point of weakness at the moment, it's Square Enix.
And they are more likely to be acquired by Sony.
I think the scary thing about this, mate, is you look at the geography, and you look at the kind of, when you start thinking about geography, music labels, anime studios, suddenly it looks more likely that Sega Sammy could be acquired by PlayStation than Xbox.
That would be, mate, that would fucking kill me. I would just, that's like imagine like
Nightmare scenario.
getting back in time in a DeLorean and telling the 16-year-old me, still loving my Saturn, that James, I'm here for the future to tell you, Sony owns Sega. I'd be like Ryu and Shenmue. I'd be like, honest to God, no, that's just a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
No. And just one wee thing I've just thought here, because obviously, like, we're sitting here going, it's not going to happen. This is why, hammer the nails into the hopes and dreams of Xbox fans everywhere. And you're going, you're selling us why it's not going to happen and why it won't happen. But earlier on, you just said that Microsoft's sheer determination and will can make it happen. Yeah, my child will stamp her feet and want ice cream and she'll be hell-bent on making it happen. Doesn't mean it's going to.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, I think that's why we labelled, that's what my notes say, this is why it could happen, but this is why it won't. And the last bit, mate, to bring the whole thing full circle, is that Microsoft have already passed on buying Sega at least once.
Yep.
So they, as far as both of us concerned, I think the ship has sailed.
Aye. And you've got to think that people looking back, even within Microsoft, may look back at that and realise that was their window. That very small window before Okawa-san passed away, where Sega were still restructuring after Dreamcast, hemorrhaging money, laying off staff, facing a massive inventory of stock that they had to pay out, reduce prices of dramatically to get it out of the warehouse, out of stores. That was the point. Sega at their lowest ebb, having to leave behind the hardware business, as much as Okawa-san wanted that to happen. He plodded on with Dreamcast, he put his personal fortune into it. It didn't work. That was the point at which Microsoft could have, struck. But for some reason, Robbie back came to Peter Moore and said, how can we help? And the answer was, well, we'll take some games from you. Whereas there was talk, again, allegedly that, they were offered, would you like to, buy the company, essentially. They were on their knees, needing saved. The analogy before with Apple as well, as I said, Microsoft are kind of rightly or wrongly credited with saving Apple. Like Steve Jobs saved Apple, but that's another, I'm not an Apple podcast. But, I just think that was their window. 2000 and 2001, that little moment where Sega knew the end was coming in terms of hardware, and they were absolutely at rock bottom, and Microsoft missed their wee window. Just this is the same Microsoft at that time that, turned down a certain game saying that it would never catch on and wasn't good enough. You remember
what
that?
Was that one? Yeah, I remember. But what game was it?
Grand Theft Auto 3.
Wasn't it? God, yeah.
Yeah, we don't. Rockstar came to Microsoft and offered them GTA 3, and they looked at it. Apparently, they said in that documentary they had a team that looked at, a team who literally had never worked in terms of like a console before, and they looked at it and they went, nah. Just went on to shift how many PlayStation 2s?
The reason I bought a PlayStation 2, mate.
A lot of people bought PS2 for that, and Gran Turismo 3. It shifted units. So, Microsoft and missing windows of opportunity, it certainly kind of goes hand in hand at times. But they had their chance, 2000, 2001, mate, and they missed it.
Yeah. So I think that rounds it off, mate. I mean, we've talked about the benefits, and mostly favour Xbox. Some slight benefits to Sega, offset by some pretty significant drawbacks in the way that Sega operate. Some reasons why it could happen, but certainly reasons why it most certainly will not. But I think, we talk about this being a reactionary podcast, which we don't normally do. We don't normally do podcasts in reaction to events. And this one will probably be but I don't think this talk is ever going to go away.
No.
Unless Sega are actually bought by Sega, I think this chat is going to keep and while Xbox still look at acquiring other companies, this is going to continue to you will always see it, and we've seen it for years and years and years now. People saying, "Oh, Microsoft are going to buy Sega." I don't think the talk's going to go away, bro. So this episode will be like a bit of an epitaph.
Aye, and it might well come back and bite us in the arse. I
It
mean,
could do.
this could be a show that a year, 18 months down the line, you know, the comment section could be full of, "Look at these two old bastards, what a lot of rubbish," you know. But at the end of the day, mate, the reason why I don't want to see Sega owned by a Sony or a Microsoft is because I still like Sega to just, I know they're part of Sammy, but they still feel, well, they have changed. They still have a wee bit of that identity left.
Yeah.
And I just think that would be suppressed dramatically if they were owned by one of the kind of giant corporations. You know, and it's just, it's not for me, mate.
I agree, mate.
I just like to see Sega continue to thrive and grow and be prosperous in their own way that they are within Sammy. Keep doing Yakuza, keep doing Persona, keep bringing out mini consoles. Just keep being Sega.
Absolutely, mate. I mean, I'd hate for them if they got absorbed into Sony or Microsoft. For me, they end up being like a Taito, who are an absolute iconic, you know, publishing company now owned by Square Enix. What you hear of them now?
Aye, they went from being like a kind of like a Titan to just being a brand.
Yeah,
you know, it's just, and that's the worry. Like the famous logo just becomes a brand. It doesn't become an identity. You know, it doesn't stay as an identity. It just becomes a brand. So that's a great point. Taito, man, they were absolute giants in their day.
Some of my earliest memories of watching like the Chase HQ or track mode back in the arcade and seeing that little triangle pop up.
Let's go, Mr. Driver.
You talking to me, or are you quoting the game?
Oh, there we go. Maybe amalgamate that into the intro going forward, mate.
Just needs to get that sparkle. But mate, it's been an absolute blast. It's I think it's been one that I think we've floated with a few times, but I think the recent news really just pulled this one into the limelight. It's been fantastic to talk through with you. Helped us flesh it out and maybe get this monkey off our back, get this all off our chest a bit.
Aye, and I mean, let's not forget. I mean, this might be a show that might attract a bit of kind of attention out with the kind of usual demographic that we have, just because it is kind of topical news. But I think there's a lot of arrogance. I think not Xbox fans are fine. There's a couple of great guys that I speak to, like Everborn Saga, great Xbox fan. Speak to him quite often on Twitter as well, and he's a massive Sega fan as well, and he really wants Sega to be acquired by Microsoft. But there's also, on the flip side, on the kind of fanboy element, there's an awful lot of like arrogance, almost entitlement, that just go and get Sega. And like I scroll by any tweets like that reply to anything I say about it, because there's just no point. And what we've tried to do here is maybe make people think, because I think a lot of these kind of guys are a wee bit too siloed. It's just go and get them, and they can't think about, you know, what the kind of stuff that we've broke it down to. I mean, the examples we've given, we've tried to go into them in as much kind of rationale as we could. And as I said, 12, 18 months time, we could be laughed at.
Yeah.
But that, I think it's important that this isn't the kind of discussion that you can have in a couple of, 140, whatever it is, character, tweets. It's far too far-reaching a topic, and there's a lot of kind of different angles and permutations, and and that's what we've tried to cover.
Yeah, I think that's it, mate. And I think a lot of people view it. I think a lot of people look at Microsoft as kind of General Grievous. And Sega is just another lightsaber in his collection.
Oh, mate, I remember I tweeted last year, whenever there was still talking, every time a Sega story comes out, it's like, oh, Microsoft should buy them. And I said, I don't want Sega to be another notch on Microsoft's bedpost.
Yeah.
Oh my God, mate. The hate I got on that tweet was unreal. It was like, calm down, people. It's opinions. You're allowed them.
Oh dear, mate. But there we go. People could be bookmarking this wherever. We could have a very busy comment section if it goes the other way, but there we go. There we go. Right, thanks a lot, mate. I think that brings us nicely to the end. Viewers, hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. Will it go through? Could it go through? Are we completely dead wrong? Or do you agree with what we say? Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation? Please get in touch. You can comment below. If you like what you're seeing, like the channel, please check out our other videos. We've got new podcast episodes every fortnight, new shorter videos every alternating fortnight. You can catch the account at Sega Guys on Twitter. I'm Swooper D, Dan the Mega Driver. You can find me on Twitter at Swooper_D. This is James the Segaholic. You can catch him at the Segaholic. We are the Sega Guys. Hope you've enjoyed watching, and we'll see you on the Sega side.
Here you go.